Hey there, this is Women on the Brink. I'm your host, Chris Jeffrey, a registered acupuncturist and wellness advisor with a passion for helping women live happier and more balanced lives. When I'm away from work, I'm usually outside in nature, either walking the seawall or I'm hiking in the mountains. And like many of you, my life has been filled with moments of hardship, some that I thought I couldn't overcome and really left me questioning my own strength. But through these challenges, I discovered resilience, courage, and a renewed sense of purpose. So I'm here to share not just my journey, but the lessons I've learned, and to remind you that no matter what obstacles come your way, there's always a path forward. And just to let you know, this podcast is not prescriptive, it's an offering. So please take what resonates with you and leave the rest. So, welcome back to Women on the Brink. If any of you watched The Empress on Netflix, I just finished it, and I had one of those moments while I was watching it, and I thought, wow, life seemed so clear back then because the men were the protectors and the providers, and the women nurtured and connected, and roles were really defined, even if they weren't necessarily fair. And I mean, I'd never trade my freedom, my quiet mornings with coffee and no one talking to me. But there's something about that old rhythm that still kind of pulls us in. So today we're asking the question, do we actually need to go back to traditional roles to make relationships and even maybe life work again? But before we go any further, let's just take a step back in history. So in the 1700s, Métis women were central figures in the economic, cultural, and diplomatic life of fur trading communities here in Canada. And these women weren't just caregivers. They were skilled negotiators, they were interpreters, and cultural liaisons, bridging, Indigenous and European worlds. They prepared food, tanned hides, crafted clothing, passed on knowledge, and all while facilitating trade and diplomacy. And their adaptability and resilience and resourcefulness didn't just sustain families, they made the communities and trade networks thrive. So the takeaway? Women have always been leaders, knowledge holders, and community builders. Their influence wasn't about control, it was about presence and connection and creating harmony in the community. And I mean, honestly, that's something we can still learn from today. So back to the Empress. The classic dynamic plays out where the men go to battle or the boardroom while the women hold the home. And, the home is the emotional and relational center. Women were the connectors, the nurturers, and the intuitive pulse keeping the family and sometimes the kingdom from falling apart. And, just like Empress Elizabeth, she goes off and accompanies France on his travels to foster peace and build bridges with the neighboring territories. I'm reminded of one of the women who really influenced me, and that was Princess Diana, because she understood the power of presence and connection. And she didn't wield any kind of political authority or military power, but she definitely embodied empathy, which was a force equally transformative and also really determined her legacy. Diana went to hospitals and visited war zones and worked with charities in ways that no official person ever did. And her presence softened fear, it eased tension, and it gave people hope. So she created human bridges, much like the Empress Elizabeth did over 100 years earlier. But both of these women show that true influence isn't always about control or protection. Sometimes it's just about showing up and listening or nurturing and building these relationships. The Empress and Diana and my Métis ancestors remind us that the nurturer and connector role is not lesser. It's absolutely essential. It keeps societies functioning, hearts open, and trust alive, something that isn't seen in many political leadership roles, especially today. But here's the thing. These roles were never balanced, women's emotional labor wasn't valued, and in all fairness, men weren't encouraged to express their vulnerability or tenderness because those virtues were seen as weakness in men, right? So the system worked on the surface, but it cost both sides something really vital, and that was authenticity. No one was truly being themselves. So back in the 1970s and 1980s, when women's liberation took root, which it had to, women were pretty tired of being confined to kitchens and corners of, just emotional service. We wanted the education, we wanted the money, the voice, and the freedom. But somewhere along the way, equality started to look like duplication for us. And what I mean by this is that women didn't just get new roles as income earners, we ended up keeping the old ones too. And you've got to remember that divorce rates doubled from the 1960s to the 1980s in the United States, and probably in Canada too, as a result of, these kinds of shifts in the workplace and new social norms. And as a result, women became the protectors, the providers, the caregivers, homemakers, therapists, chefs, project managers, and let's be honest, kind of the emotional janitors for the whole family. We really ended up liberating ourselves from dependence, only to find ourselves carrying everyone's load. And so when I think about traditional roles, I don't have to look very far because I've lived both. And there was a time when I was a stay-at-home mom and my whole world revolved around nurturing and managing the family. Meals and play dates and laundry were all consuming. And I loved the little moments, the after-school playtime and the bedtime routines and the chance to really know my kids. But part of me was fading behind that role, and my identity had become service. Though I was needed, I wasn't always seen. And then life shifted, as it does, and suddenly I was a single working mom, and overnight I had to become everything. I had to become that provider and protector and disciplinarian and all the rest of it. And I went from, what am I making for dinner tonight to how do I keep the lights on and manage everything? And don't get me wrong, there was definitely a strength in that. A pretty fierce independence came through, but it came with deep exhaustion. I was doing all the roles, but not being in any of them fully, I'd say. And that's really when it hit me that not one role is better than the other. We were never meant to do it alone, none of us, right? The stay-at-home me longed for self-expression, and the working mom me longed for rest and support. So maybe the pendulum doesn't need to swing between dependence and burnout. What we really need is partnership and community and permission to be whole humans, not superhumans. And yeah, I know some of you are thinking, yeah, that's great, Christine, but there's no one else here to do those dishes. Trust me, I get it. But I think balance doesn't mean waiting for a magical helper to appear. It means giving yourself permission to not do everything so perfectly. So maybe choosing frozen pizza over burnout, maybe saying good enough instead of just one more thing. Sometimes the revolution isn't about burning down the system. It's about letting the laundry pile up and going to bed anyway. Because the truth is, we may not have anyone else to pass the baton on to, but we can stop carrying it around like it's some kind of flaming sword. And I guess that's really what balance does look like. So how do we get back there? How do we get back to balance? Not traditionalism, not burnout, but true partnership. So stay with us and we'll break that down.
Join us on our website for articles from our podcasts at www.womenonthebrink.net. There you'll find extra tools that can be used to raise self-awareness and build resilience. We want to make this experience as interactive as possible for you Brinkers. So join the forums, introduce yourself, and share your stories.
So balance starts by remembering what those traditional roles were trying to express beneath the patriarchy. So the masculine impulse is to protect and provide and create stability. The feminine impulse is to nurture and connect and bring meaning to things. And these aren't just gendered roles. I mean, they're energetic ones. We all have both. But the modern world rewards the doing, the achieving, the controlling, while undervaluing the being, the feeling, and connecting. So balance certainly isn't about returning back to the 1850s or the 1960s, but it's about reclaiming the parts of ourselves that we've neglected. You know, maybe we have to ask some different questions like, can we let men be providers without assuming that means women can't? Can we allow the masculine to lead sometimes without making that meaning we're giving up our power? Can women be nurturers without feeling diminished by it? And can we redefine nurture as wisdom, as emotional intelligence and intuition and steadiness rather than this self sacrifice? And can we stop competing over who's more exhausted, who's done more, who's held more, and instead just start co-creating a rhythm that honors both the practical and the emotional stuff in life? Does that make sense? So when I look at couples, and I mean, even the way I relate to other people now, what I notice is that most of us are really craving energetic reciprocity. And that doesn't mean perfect equality or a scorecard, but it just is sort of this sense of being met on a certain level. A feeling that, both people's efforts and capacities and limitations are seen and respected. So the goal isn't to, again, split everything. It's to live and move in harmony and to trust that some days one person carries more and other days the balance shifts the other way. And here's the big one, for me anyway. We need to value the things that can't be measured, like emotional presence, attunement, grace, just as much as what can be measured. This energy is more complementary in nature, the kind that allows both people to rest, to rise, and to thrive without one burning out in the process. And it's saying your strength supports mine and mine supports yours. I mean, this should be one of the biggest benefits to being in a partnership with anyone, don't you think? And yet, I mean, I really don't see this happening across the board. Probably because we haven't yet developed the language around it to bring it up in our conversations. Or maybe as women, we feel a sense of shame in admitting that we can't do it all on our own. Or maybe we're just so used to thinking that this is the way it's always been that change will be harder than just digging our heels in and getting on with it. I don't know. In any case, I think we could start doing things a little differently. And here's a couple of suggestions that I have. So I think we should start looking at it with curiosity and not criticism. And maybe say to the other person, I'd love to understand what balance looks like for you, because that kind of opens it up to a conversation instead of, you never help out enough. The goal is to uncover how you both feel about providing, protecting, or nurturing, not to tally who's done more. And for me, I like to use the term, the word energy language and not task language. Like, I notice how often you hold the emotional energy for our family. I'd love to share that with you. Or when I'm in provider mode all the time, I feel disconnected and I'd like to bring in more space for rest or to connect. I mean, this really reframes the discussion from what you do to how it affects your nervous system and relationship. And I think it's a really good idea to acknowledge early on what each person naturally brings to the table. So, saying what you admire about your partner's role. I really appreciate how you create safety for us. And I love how nurturing and intuitive you are, because recognition opens the door for deeper collaboration, and it reminds both parties that they're already contributing value to the relationship. And then just maybe name what things are working, and that makes room for the harder truths that might follow. And I guess to define what you want your roles to look like, because let's face it, our roles shift as life changes. So maybe asking, what do you feel called to contribute at this stage of our life? Where do you feel depleted? What would balance look like for both of us right now? And then just agree to experiment and keep revisiting this conversation and just say, how are we doing with balance? What feels light? What feels heavy? And I think, again, I always come back to this one. This is an important one for me, but making the emotional labor visible, because women carry so much of the unseen work, like remembering birthdays and booking appointments, keeping the peace in the family. So, I think it would be nice if, she could say, "Hey, guess what? This is what's on my mental list this week. Can we redistribute some of this?" And this awareness even often shifts things in the dynamic and keep things light and with humor. So when I think about like a modern example of what balance and partnership actually looks like, I think of the Obamas. Michelle Obama once said that their marriage worked because they stopped trying to be the same kind of partner. Like he's the visionary, she's the steady ground, and they don't compete for space. They complement their ecosystem. And that's it right there. It's complementary. Two different energies just working together. And one thing I really want to put in here into this episode was this little tidbit. I was listening to Tracy Litt recently, and she's a coach for female entrepreneurs. And she said something that really honestly made me sit up straight. She says that all women are addicted to control and hyperfunctioning. And I thought, ouch. But also, yeah, I mean, she's not wrong. We're all somewhere on that spectrum. We've all been taught that our value comes from doing more and managing everything and being the glue and the fixer and the planner. Would you not agree, ladies? So here's the thing I want to leave you with. We don't want to have to go back to old school gender roles, and we definitely don't have to do it all by ourselves. Balance doesn't mean everything has to be 50-50. It's about partnership with your partner, with your community, and honestly, with yourself. So go ahead, let the laundry pile up, order the second takeout this week, take a nap in the middle of the day if that's what you need. Real power isn't about holding it all together all the time. It's about knowing when to stop, when to ask for help, and when to just laugh at the chaos of it all. Thanks for joining, and I want you to know that this isn't just a podcast, this is a movement. So share this information with your friends, and let's go, ladies.